Hi, everybody. My name is Rob Abel of the IMS Global Learning Consortium, and welcome to our Learning Impact on Demand series, where we're exploring what we are learning about effective digital teaching and learning during the accelerated movement to online, virtual, distance education in this age of COVID-19 and beyond. Today, we have a 10-minute leadership interview on this topic, and we are pleased to have with us Mike Hale, who is Vice President of Education North America for VitalSource, a leading provider of e-textbooks and study tools. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Rob. Happy to be here.
Great. It's nice to have you. What we'd like to hone in on for our audience is your insights from this unprecedented move, this acceleration of digital learning. Some, of course, which is probably being done well, and some perhaps not done so well, and all the spectrum in between. The impact of COVID-19 will be with us for some time, and from your vantage point, we'd like to hear what you're learning right now and how you think things might be different going forward. So let's just start out with right now. What are you learning right now? As everyone has had to move rapidly to fully online and dealing with this unprecedented scale up, and what priorities are you seeing, and what best practices and so forth?
Sure. Well, while there are plenty of examples of large online programs, it's still the exception. There are lots of big ones, but we're still the exception. So particularly in the traditional 2- and 4-year space, courses are traditionally face-to-face taught, and are taught much the same way as they were 50 years ago. Even with LMS's ubiquitous and the internet, traditional 2- and 4-year schools are fairly resistant to change over time. And then overnight, face-to-face courses are gone, and they've been forced to go online. So stating the obvious here, this rapid scaling is top priority. Got to scale courses, transition students to online, transition faculty to online, and ensuring students have the content and remain engaged. And it's that last part of the elephant that we know best. We're really in the business of making sure students get the materials they need.
Right.
So what we've seen there is there are also, like online programs, there are innovative programs around course materials distribution. Inclusive access, where students get content on day one. They can keep it if they want, and if they keep it, they're charged the lowest price available on the market. And those have grown over the past few years, but still, it's a minority of the market.
Right.
But overnight, students in semester schools were off campus, forced to go online. Faculty were forced to go online. Lots of companies like VitalSource, we did things for free. That's not sustainable, and I don't even want to discuss that because there's nothing innovative about that. Everybody did their part. For the schools that are quarter schools, which is a minority of schools, one of the interesting things we've seen is quarter school that already had inclusive access in place, they had a little time to plan.
Nice. And
they said, oh, we can at least make sure students have the content they need. And so they just, massively increase the number of courses they have inclusive access. So the nice thing about that is the infrastructure was there. So where we see the infrastructure in place for course materials, you can at least address that. And it's a small part of the equation, but it's an important one. Students do need those required materials. Now on the larger bit, the infrastructure is there as well. LMSs are ubiquitous. All the tools are there, but it's a massive change management process as much as anything. Right. And, again, not our part of the world, so I don't really want to comment on it.
Right. So, and you're talking primarily higher ed, where the LMSs are.
That's right.
And so basically what you're saying is, if an institution is already set up with a supplier that enables inclusive access for given materials, they were in pretty good shape. Quick question on the faculty. Are you hearing any feedback on the preparedness of faculty, maybe, in terms of how ready they might be versus the students, or any little tidbits you could provide there?
Yeah, the feedback we have heard is, for the most part, they're not prepared. But again, the part we deal with is just the distribution of course materials. And we've seen very little pushback from faculty over the years with inclusive access, because the key is faculty don't have to change anything.
Right, right.
That's a big deal for them. If they have to change the content they're using or change the modality, big deal. But if when they realize, oh, it just means students actually get the materials I say are required, they're fine. So what we do is we don't require much change on their behalf, so we don't see a lot of squawking.
Okay, so that's a great insight. You know, inclusive access to the materials that the teachers are used to using, and that the students can access independently, very important. What do you think about the summer and the fall? You know, a lot of institutions are going to remain online or practice somewhat differently. Any differences you see there, or primarily the same, or different emphasis perhaps at all?
Well, I think it'll be similar in that on the course materials front, the institutions that have the infrastructure in place, all they have to do is increase what they're doing there. And we expect to see that. You know, on the quarter school basis, UC Davis increased their number of courses with IA 300%. So now over 60%. So they're covering those students. We'll see the same thing in the fall, we believe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, on the face-to-face courses today, one of the problems we think needs to be solved, whether we solve it or not, is students shouldn't have to use much, if any, of their cognitive load on the question of whether they get their course materials that are required. And so, and we can't do this without the IMS, because everything we deliver is through LTI. And if that infrastructure in place, student just goes into their LMS, course materials there, and it gets connected. Now, for those schools that want to ramp up and do that, haven't had those kind of programs in place, it's going to be a question of, you know, how they marshal resources internally. Now, it has shortened that decision making. We've absolutely seen that. We've seen schools come to us say, hey, we want to do this now. So we think there'll be more institutions running programs like inclusive access or equitable access, which where every student gets everything. But we're still going to see a lot of universities just aren't ready to make those decisions.
Right. It certainly seems like the inclusive access is a good bet, because we really don't know exactly what's going to happen.
That's right.
All right. I mean, people could go back to school and we could have another problem or recurrence or upswing,
Right.
or, you know, it's really going to be pretty crazy. So the hardest question is the kind of longer term, you know, perhaps, I don't know, you have to be kind of a predict ahead or think ahead. You know, does this change people's mindsets in the future, even when COVID-19 is, you know, gone away? We have a vaccine or what have you. Obviously, we could have other pandemics in the future, but and preparedness is an issue. But what do you think? Is the exposure now to more digital really changing the way people are going to think about digital in the future?
I do think it will. Let me just start with the students. Still today, even though students today, their world is largely digital. They operate their social world digitally. Everything they do is digitally. The truth is, when they're asked about course materials, many times they still say they prefer print, just because that's what they're used to.
Right, right.
What we know is once students go digital, they don't go back.
Okay.
So that bridge will be crossed. It's never a barrier once they go digital, but that perception, and that's one of the perceptions that institutions worry about. But and this is a bit of a soapbox for me. I was former faculty member in curriculum instruction. I spent time in school reform, and you know, the problem we're trying to solve is just making sure students get the content that's required. We started in dental schools, and if you're going to dental school, you have to buy the fake head with the mouth that you can practice on. It's required course materials, and you have to get it or you don't graduate. So why would we not make sure a required course materials that students get it? But more importantly, as we go digital, there's so much we can do to contribute to the learning. All the data that is gathered. You know, Caliper, fantastic. Another thing that IMS has pioneered. Just our company generates 3.5 Caliper events in the last year. Are people making use of that? No, not necessarily in some cases. But with Caliper, you can get data from VitalSource and the publishers and put it all together and make meaning out of it.
Yep.
So one of the things, this is a little hopeful for me. One of the things I hope is that institutions are going to start focusing more on how do we help students be more successful in the courses. And I'm not saying they haven't always been concerned about that. They have, but it's been a little bit more theoretical. Now they are looking at graduation rates. They are looking at the efficacy of going to university. And once you go digital, you have that data, and you have, you know, just anything that can take the student from thinking about assessment as something other than summative is a win. Right. If they can start thinking about assessment as formative to their own learning, that's hugely beneficial.
Right. Well, that's great. You said 3.5. I think you meant 3.5 billion in a year.
Yeah, 3.5 billion. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to clarify that because I wasn't sure I heard it correctly. Yeah. So last question for me is just a quick, you know, how do you see you've already said some nice things about IMS, and thank you to VitalSource for being a great leader in the IMS Global Learning Consortium community. How would you describe the impact of the work of IMS Global right now and going forward in terms of this?
Well, I mean, just to be perfectly blunt, VitalSource doesn't have a business without IMS. And I don't mean that because you know, make our business better. It's that we have to play well with others. Mm. We sit in the middle of the course materials ecosystem. We are partners with just about everybody. And we need to be able to communicate with everybody and exchange data. We do about 1 million LTI launches a week. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. That's a ton.
That's amazing. That's scale. Yeah.
I know. It just happens. It's not, right. There's no, you know, humans in the background making sure it just happens. And that's huge for us. You know, I'll give you an example. In 2005, we did our first integration with an institution. It took about 3 months. And wow. Today, an integration takes 6 minutes. That's huge.
Yeah.
And I also will say that the IMS has also been a great place. The actual events themselves have been a great place for us to exchange ideas with other partners, from the universities to the other technology partners. I'll give you an example. UMBC, where Dr. Jack Seuss is, a IMS board member, I think former chair. Mm-hmm. We did a study with Blackboard and VitalSource at UMBC using data, Caliper data, and we discovered that students with high engagement on VitalSource and Blackboard were 200% more likely to pass a class than those with low engagement. Mm-hmm. That's about as simple as it gets.
Right.
We're not talking about really high level assessment data. It's just, are they doing things? And you know, that kind of thing is made possible by data, but it also is made possible because we knew Jack Seuss from IMS. We knew Blackboard through IMS and in other ways, and we were able to do this via Caliper.
That's great. I understand you wanted to ask me a question.
I would love to ask you a question. Sure. I think you've been at IMS, what, 14 years?
A little over 14, yeah.
Yeah. So in those years, what's been the most surprising thing that you've seen as a development?
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of surprises, I would say. I think that to me, the most surprising thing is when I came into IMS, although there were many, many standards, in the ecosystem, so to speak, you know, the education and learning ecosystem, they weren't really broadly adopted in a way that was actually producing a return on investment for suppliers, for institutions. In other words, you can implement standards, but it actually costs you more to implement the standards. So we put in place essentially a much more market-focused approach. But when I say market, I include institutions in that in terms of what is actually useful. And the surprising part to me then was that, you know, we grew from 50 members to now over 550 member organizations. And at the time, IMS was already by far the largest standards organization in the space. And now we're literally 10x, and we're larger than all the other standards activities combined. And that is surprising to me. I thought maybe the most members we would ever have is like 150 or something like that. So I'm very, very pleased about that, because it just shows that we're meeting a need, and we're meeting across the board, because the members are institutions as well as suppliers and so forth. So thanks for that question, and thank you, Mike, for your insights. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you back here for more of our series on highly effective teaching, digital teaching and learning. And this is Rob Abel saying bye for now, and let's keep the learning going. Thanks.